Imagine for a second that you could gather up every single mammal on Earth.
Okay, that's quite a visual.
Right, just put them all onto one giant planetary scale. Every human being, every blue whale, every elephant, every cow, every mouse in the field.
Yeah.
What percentage of that total weight do you think is actually made up of wild animals?
It's a number that usually shocks people.
Exactly. Because according to the university lecture notes we are diving into today, the answer is just 4%.
Just four.
Which means we have essentially turned the Earth from this, wild, thriving jungle into one giant fenced-in farm.
It really is a staggering statistic.
Yeah.
And it completely shatters the way most of us are taught to visualize the natural world.
Yeah, totally.
But that cognitive dissonance, that gap between what we think is happening and what the data actually shows, is central to understanding the modern human condition.
And understanding that condition is exactly why we are here. Welcome to another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating set of university lecture notes focused on global challenges and sustainable development. And our source material includes this massive 2021 study on climate anxiety, and the findings are honestly pretty heavy.
They really are.
Globally, 56% of young people surveyed agreed with the statement that humanity is doomed.
Just let that sink in. Over half.
Right, and in places like India and the Philippines, that number jumps to like 73 or 74%.
That is a profound level of existential dread for an entire generation to carry around. And the authors of these notes, they don't dismiss that anxiety at all. They actually validate it through the data.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Because whether you are prepping for a policy meeting or you're just trying to navigate your daily news feed without completely spiraling, our mission today is to give you the ultimate cheat sheet to the state of the planet.
Exactly.
We're going to look at the hard facts behind that generational dread and explore the rigorous frameworks that scientists use to figure out if we really are, doomed or if there is an actual pragmatic roadmap out of this.
And to understand that 56% doom statistic, the sources tell us we have to look straight at the primary driver of the anxiety, which is, of course, global warming.
Right.
The data here is just unrelenting. They cite Copernicus data showing 2023 was the hottest year on record compared to the 1850 to 1900 average.
Yeah, we've all felt that.
But before we can solve anything, the lecture notes argue we have to strip away our fundamental misconceptions about how the Earth's systems actually operate.
And the sources bring up this fascinating concept from a project called Gapminder to explain those misconceptions.
Yes, Gapminder. They conduct these massive global surveys, and they consistently find that people are, quote, systematically wrong about the state of the world.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means it's not just that we lack information. It's that our intuition about global trends is actually worse than if we were just guessing randomly. Like a chimpanzee throwing darts would score better.
That's hilarious, but also kind of terrifying.
It is. We fundamentally misunderstand the mechanics of the crises.
Which brings up an analogy in the text that completely rewired how I think about carbon dioxide.
The scale versus the bathtub.
Yes. Normally, when the media talks about emissions, we visualize a scale, like a balancing act. We are putting bad stuff into the atmosphere, so if we just put less bad stuff in, the scale will eventually balance out and the planet will cool down.
Right. That's the intuitive side.
But the lecture notes argued that the atmosphere is not a scale at all. It is a bathtub.
That is the crucial paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
The atmosphere is a bathtub, and the carbon dioxide faucet is currently running wide open.
Okay, let me push back on this with a scenario, because I think this is exactly where our Gapminder intuition fails us.
Sure, go for it.
Let's say we wave a magic wand tomorrow, and we have our annual net CO2 emissions globally. We cut the flow from the faucet by exactly 50%. Does the global temperature drop?
The unforgiving math of the bathtub says no. The temperature does not drop. It actually continues to rise.
Wait, how does that make sense? I mean, if we were putting in half as much, shouldn't the system start to recover?
Not if the drain is essentially clogged.
Ah, the drain.
Right. When it comes to CO2 in our atmospheric bathtub, the outflow, the amount of carbon naturally removed from the air, is incredibly small on a human timescale.
So where does it even go?
Well, the sources explain that the CO2 that does leave the atmosphere mostly dissolves into the oceans.
Which doesn't sound great either.
It's not.
Okay.
That creates its own catastrophic problem called ocean acidification, which just degrades marine ecosystems.
Right.
And the rest of the carbon might eventually form into rocks, but that process takes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years.
So on the timeline of human civilization, that drain is basically non-existent.
Exactly. So long as we add any net CO2, no matter how small the amount, the total volume in the bathtub keeps rising.
Wow.
Having our emissions doesn't drain the tub, it just means the tub overflows slightly slower. The only way to stop the temperature from rising is to turn the faucet off completely. Net zero.
That reframing is genuinely terrifying, but it also provides incredible clarity, It's not about slowing down, it's about a complete halt.
Yeah, that's the hard truth of it.
So naturally, the next question is who exactly has their hand on the faucet? Because it's really easy to feel like the burden is distributed equally among all 8 billion of us.
And what's fascinating here is that the sources point us to a very specific, highly concentrated group.
Let's hear it.
They reference the April 2024 Carbon Majors Database report. The researchers tracked historical emissions back to the Industrial Revolution, and the data reveals that responsibility is, it's anything but evenly distributed.
Not even close. According to this report, since the 2016 Paris Agreement, just 57 entities are linked to 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions.
Just 57.
Think about that. You could fit the key decision makers for those 57 entities into a single hotel conference room, and they control 80% of the carbon flowing into the bathtub.
And the database breaks these 57 entities down into 3 impartial categories to show us exactly how the global economy is structured.
Yeah, let's break those down.
First, you have investor-owned companies. These are your household names like Chevron, ExxonMobil, and BP. Historically, the report links them to roughly 31% of tracked emissions.
Okay, so that's the private sector. Then you have state-owned companies, right? Operations like Saudi Aramco and Gazprom, and they account for 33%.
Correct.
And finally, you have the nation-states themselves accounting for the remaining 36%, driven heavily by China's coal production and the former Soviet Union.
It's a really stark map of global leverage. If the goal is to shut off the faucet, those 57 entities are the valve.
But if we just shut that valve, are we suddenly safe? I mean, let's say those 57 entities pivot to total green energy tomorrow. Do we just brush our hands and say the planet is saved?
Well, no. The researchers emphasize that focusing solely on the CO2 bathtub is actually a dangerous tunnel vision. Carbon is really just one room in a burning house.
And the sources introduce a framework to explain this, created by a team of around 30 leading scientists led by Johan Rockström. It's called the Planetary Boundaries.
Yes, and this is one of the most critical frameworks in modern environmental science. These scientists asked a fundamental question. What were the absolute physical limits of the Earth's systems?
Like, where is the edge of the cliff?
Exactly. They identified 9 interconnected boundaries that dictate the stability of the planet. They call it the safe operating space for humanity.
Stay inside the boundaries, and the Earth remains accommodating.
Right, but cross them, and we risk triggering abrupt, irreversible environmental changes.
And according to the September 2023 update published in Science Advances, humanity has now crossed 6 of those 9 boundaries. We are officially operating outside the safe space.
And the specific boundaries we've crossed reveal exactly how complex the crisis is. Yes, we crossed climate change, but we also crossed freshwater change, land system change, biogeochemical flows, novel entities, and biosphere integrity.
Okay, let me stop you there, because terms like biogeochemical flows can sound like, academic jargon.
Fair enough.
What does crossing that boundary actually look like on the ground?
It's a great question. Biogeochemical flows refer primarily to the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, which humanity has completely disrupted through the massive use of synthetic agricultural fertilizers.
So farming.
Exactly. When we pump millions of tons of nitrogen into the soil to grow crops, it doesn't just stay in the dirt. It washes away into rivers and eventually the oceans.
Which creates those massive algae blooms we read about.
Precisely. The algae feed on the runoff, explode in population, and then when they die and decompose, the process sucks almost all the oxygen out of the water.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it creates vast aquatic dead zones where absolutely no marine life can survive. That is a boundary being crossed.
That's terrifying.
Just like novel entities, which is the scientific classification for synthetic chemicals, microplastics, and forever chemicals that we introduce into the environment faster than we can even assess their safety.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting, though. The boundary that completely stopped me in my tracks was biosphere integrity.
Ah, yes, the biodiversity measure.
Exactly, which is essentially the measure of extinction rates. We briefly touched on this at the very beginning of the deep dive. We like to imagine the Earth as this vast, untamed wilderness from nature documentaries. But the data paints Earth as a highly engineered industrial zone.
The biomass statistics in the lecture notes illustrate this perfectly. When researchers estimate the distribution of all mammal biomass on Earth by weight, 62% is livestock.
Let's just break that down because it's wild. Cattle alone make up 35% of all mammal weight on Earth.
Yeah.
Pigs are 12%. Add in sheep and others, and livestock is 62%. Then humans make up another 34%.
Which leaves that staggering 4%.
Yeah.
All the wild mammals combined, every single wild elephant, lion, whale, deer, and bear, make up a mere 4% of the global mammal biomass.
Hold on. You are telling me that the entire animal kingdom, everything we see on, like, planet Earth, is basically a statistical rounding error compared to human agriculture?
That is exactly what the data shows, and it highlights why agriculture is cited as the leading driver of biodiversity loss.
Because we just need so much space for the livestock.
Right. We are actively converting the land system, which is another crossed boundary, by the way, to support that 62% livestock mass, pushing the wild 4% closer to zero.
Okay, so we've established that the Earth's physical systems are buckling. 6 of 9 boundaries crossed. The wild world reduced to a fraction. It really feels like a massive ecological collision.
It does.
But the lecture notes make a very deliberate pivot here. They ask, how is the human population actually doing inside this fenced-in, strained planet?
Right. We have to shift our lens from the ecological to the economic, from the planet itself to the people living on it.
And the sources bring Gapminder back into the fold here to test our intuition again.
Oh, this is a great example.
Yeah. If you ask a random person on the street, is global poverty getting better or worse? The vast majority will tell you it's getting worse, but the data tells a completely different story.
What do the numbers say?
In 1980, roughly 40% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, which is defined as surviving on less than $2 a day. Today, that share has plummeted to around 10%.
The authors of these lecture notes frame this as one of the most significant demographic shifts in modern history. Hundreds of millions of people have moved out of the most desperate, grinding conditions imaginable.
But, and this is key, the text is also very careful not to let us view that stat through rose-colored glasses.
Because poverty is highly relative.
Exactly. Yes, extreme poverty. The $2 a day baseline is down. But in high-income countries, the poverty line isn't $2, it's closer to $30 a day.
Right.
And globally, a staggering 84% of the human population still lives on less than $30 a day. So while extreme destitution has shrunk, the vast majority of humanity is still incredibly economically vulnerable.
They are one medical emergency or one bad harvest away from total ruin.
Exactly.
And that vulnerability is magnified when the source is examined the opposite end of the economic spectrum. The researchers counter the progress on poverty with the severe reality of wealth inequality, using data from Credit Suisse and Oxfam.
The numbers here are honestly difficult to even visualize.
They really are.
In 2020, the top 1% of households owned 43% of the world's wealth. The top 10% owned 85% of it.
Which means the bottom 90% of humanity is left to fight over just 15% of the global pie.
Yeah. And the Oxfam statistic from the text really crystallizes it. 81 billionaires possess more wealth than half of the world's population combined.
Just let that number settle for a second.
Wait, 81 individuals have more economic power than 4 billion people?
Yes. And according to Forbes data from 2024 cited in the notes, the concentration is only intensifying. There are a record 2,781 billionaires globally, worth an aggregate of $14.2 trillion.
Let me make sure I'm connecting the dots here between the two halves of our discussion.
Okay.
Are the sources arguing that this extreme wealth inequality is directly related to why we are failing to manage the planetary boundaries?
Yes, exactly.
Because if an ultra-wealthy investor owns a massive stake in one of those 57 carbon major companies, they aren't the ones losing their home to rising sea levels or agricultural collapse in the global south. Does this wealth just insulate them from the consequences?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that insulation is the exact mechanism that breaks the system. The lectures discuss a foundational economic concept called the tragedy of the commons.
Right, I've heard of that.
It's the idea that when multiple individuals act in their own short-term self-interest, they will collectively deplete a shared resource, like a communal fish pond.
Or in our case, the atmospheric bathtub and the biosphere.
Exactly. But the tragedy of the commons assumes everyone suffers when the fish pond is empty. Extreme wealth concentration completely distorts that.
Because they can just buy fish from somewhere else.
Right. When the individuals making the decisions about resource extraction are completely insulated from the negative consequences by their wealth, the feedback loop is broken.
That makes total sense.
They don't feel the effects of the crossed boundaries, while the bottom 90%, who only own 15% of the wealth, bear almost the entirety of the climate costs.
So we have a deeply unstable structure. We have physical ecological boundaries being broken on the outside and massive social inequality and economic vulnerability hollowing us out on the inside.
It's a squeeze from both sides.
How do we synthesize these two massive colliding realities? I mean, is there a framework that actually addresses both?
That is the exact problem that the final framework in our sources tries to solve. It's an economic model designed by Kate Raworth to address both the planet and the people simultaneously.
The donut economics model, right?
Yes, donut economics.
It's such a brilliant visual. If you picture a classic donut, you have the empty hole in the middle, the ring of dough itself, and the space completely outside the donut.
In this model, the outer edge of the donut represents the ecological ceiling. Those are the 9 planetary boundaries we just discussed: climate change, biodiversity loss, chemical pollution.
Right, the stuff we can't cross.
Exactly. If humanity's footprint pushes past that outer edge, we are in overshoot. We are degrading the planet.
And the hole in the middle of the donut represents the social foundation. This is based on fundamental human rights and needs like health, education, peace, equity, housing, and food.
Correct.
If people lack those basics, they fall into the hole in the middle, which the model calls the shortfall.
The sources map our current reality onto this donut, and the statistics of that shortfall are grim. Globally, 795 million people are undernourished. Wow. An estimated 150 million children are engaged in child labor. These populations are currently living deep in the hole of the donut.
So what does this all mean for the roadmap we talked about?
It means the ultimate goal of humanity, the true definition of sustainable development, is to get everyone out of the hole of social shortfall without pushing our resource consumption over the outer edge into ecological overshoot.
We want to be in the dough.
Exactly. The goal is to live inside the actual dough of the donut. That ring is defined as the safe and just space for humanity.
A regenerative and distributive economy. It's a beautiful concept, but a donut is just a metaphor. It isn't a policy. How do we actually pull people up into the dough without breaking through the ceiling?
Well, the sources present the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as the literal map to navigate us there.
The ones from the UN.
Yes. Established at the 2015 UN Summit. These are 17 specific international goals. Things like no poverty, zero hunger, affordable and clean energy, and responsible consumption and production.
So the SDGs are the actionable metrics. They give nations and industries a checklist to ensure their growth isn't just, creating more billionaires while crossing more planetary boundaries.
Right. They are the practical instructions for how to reach the sweet spot of the donut.
Looking back at the journey the lecture notes took us on today, it's a lot to process.
It really is.
We started with the mathematical reality of the climate bathtub, realizing that having emissions doesn't drain the tub at all. We explored the 9 planetary boundaries, recognizing the shock that wild mammals now make up just 4% of global biomass.
And we also confronted the human element. The researchers showed us the massive strides made in reducing extreme $2 a day poverty, while demonstrating how extreme wealth inequality just short-circuits our ability to protect the global commons.
And finally, we landed on donut economics and the SDGs as a way to visualize a balanced future. It frames the 56% of young people feeling doomed, not as irrational, but as a deeply logical response to the data.
Yeah, they are paying attention.
But it also proves we have a blueprint for survival.
We do. And there is a specific detail in the source materials about how these concepts are taught that I think is crucial.
Oh, what's that?
The university students who received these lecture notes were given a practical assignment. They were told to select a specific industry, like aviation, finance, or agriculture, and map it onto the donut.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, they had to identify whether their chosen industry was actively pushing the planet into overshoot, or if its labor practices were pulling people down into shortfall.
It forces you to take these massive, abstract, global problems and apply them directly to the supply chains and business models operating right in your own neighborhood.
This raises an important question, though, and it's one the sources circle around but leaves for us to
Mhm.
answer.
What's the question?
If the power to actually close the carbon faucet is held heavily by 57 entities, and if the ability to extract resources is dictated by a financial system where 81 billionaires hold more wealth than half the planet, it forces us to ask, is the ultimate solution to saving the Earth's ecology actually an environmental one at all?
Oh, wow.
Or is it fundamentally a question of redesigning the global financial system?
That is a phenomenal question. If the rules of the economy dictate the health of the biosphere, maybe you can't fix the bathtub without first fixing the bank.
Exactly.
Think about that as you look at the news tomorrow and consider how your own industry plays a role in that system. For you, the listener, keep questioning your assumptions, keep exploring these frameworks, and ask yourself what it will take to pull us all back into the safe space of the donut. Until next time, keep diving deep.